Here the old man faltered, mumbling, and lapsed into a moody and apprehensive silence, glancing nervously over his shoulder and then turning back to stare fascinatedly at the distant black reef. When I spoke to him, he did not answer, so I knew I would have to let him finish the bottle. The insane yarn I was hearing interested me profoundly, for I fancied there was contained within a sort of crude allegory based upon the strangeness of Innsmouth, elaborated by an imagination at once creative and full of scraps of exotic legend. Kind of like Glenn Beck, right? Not for a moment did I believe that the tale had any real substantial foundation. Also like Glenn Beck, well, actually he's not only right, but brilliantly right at times. But yeah, don't go listen to Glenn Beck as a source of reality. But nonetheless, the account held a glint of genuine terror, if only because it brought in references to strange jewels clearly akin to malign tiara I had seen at Newburyport. Also, Alex Jones. Perhaps the ornaments had, after all, come from some strange land, and possibly the wild stories were lies of bygone Obed himself, rather than of this antique loper. I handed Zadok the bottle, and he drained it to the last drop. It was curious how he could stand so much whiskey, for not even a trace of thickness had come into his high, wheezy voice. He licked the nose of the bottle and sipped it into his pocket, and slipped it into his pocket. Then, beginning to nod and whisper softly to himself, I bent close to catch any articulate words he might utter, and thought I saw a sardonic smile behind the stained, bushy whiskers. Yes, he was really forming words, and I could grasp a fair portion of them. Poor Matt. Matt, he allus was agonite. Tried to line up the folks on his side, and had long talk with the preachers. No use. They ran the congregational parson out of town, and the Methodist feller quit. Never did see, resolved Babcock, the Baptist person, again. Wrath, oh, Jehovah, I was a mighty little critter, but I heard what I heard, and seen what I seen. Dagon and Ashtoreth, Belial and Beelzebub, golden calf and the idols of Canaan, and the Philistines, Babylonish abominations, Mene, Tekel, a parson. I don't remember what that actually means. It's like from the book of Daniel, isn't it? He stopped again, and from the look in his watery blue eyes, I feared that he was close to a stupor after all. But when I gently shook his shoulder, he turned on me with astonishing alertness and snapped out some more obscure phrases. The book of Daniel is like based on something from like 3,500 years ago, at least. Arkat, something like that. But Daniel was a character in that legend, in that epic. Dan L. Yeah. Don't believe him. Hey. Heh, heh, heh. Then just tell me, young feller, why Captain Obed and 20-odd other folk used to row about to Devil Reef in the dead of night and chant things so loud you could hear 'em all over town when the wind was right. Tell me that, hey. And tell me why Obed was always dropping heavy things down in the deep water to the other side of the reef, where the bottom shoots down like a cliff lower and you can sound. Tell me what has been done with the funny-shaped lead thingamajig, as Wallachia gave him. Hey, boy, and when did they howl on May Eve? And again, next Halloween. And why'd the new church parsons, fellers as used to be sailors, wear them queer robes and cover themselves with them gold-like things? Obed brung. Hey. Really spoils the story somewhat to do this to the language. And I'm correcting some of it as I'm going. The watery blue eyes, almost savage and maniacal now, and the dirty white beard bristled electrically. Old Zadok probably saw me shrink back, for he began to cackle evilly. Ha, 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 ha. Beginning to see, hey? Maybe you'd like to bend me in those days when I saw things at night and out to sea from the cupola top of my house. Oh, I can tell you, little pitchers have big ears, and I wasn't missing anything. Oh, what was gossiped about Captain Obed and the folks about to the reef? Ha, ha, ha. How about the night I took Pa's ship's glass up to the cupola and seed the reef a bristling thick with shapes that dove off quickly soon as the moon rose? Obed and the folks was in a dory, but those shapes drove off the far side into the deep water and never came up. How do you like to be a little shaver alone in a cupola, a watching shapes, as wasn't human shapes? Ha, hey, ha, ha, ha. The old man was getting hysterical, and I began to shiver with a nameless alarm. He had a gnarled claw on my shoulder. You know, a hook hand, apparently. And it seemed to me that its shaking was not altogether that of mirth. Suppose one night you saw something heavy heaved, often Obed's dory beyond the reef, and then learned the next day a young feller was missing from home. Hey, did anybody ever see, hide, or hair of Hiram Gilman again, did they? And Nick Pierce? And Llewellyn Waite? And Adoniram Southwick? And Harry Garrison? Hey. Ha 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 ha. Shapes talking sign language with their hands. Them as had real hands. That Cthulhu movie again with their room full of names on walls. Well, sir, that was the time Obed began to get on his feet again. Folks saw his 3 daughters wearing gold-like things as nobody ever saw on them before, and smoke started coming about the reef and Chimbley. Other folks was prospering too. Fish began to swarm into the harbor, fit to kill, and heaven knows what size cargoes we begun to ship about to Newburyport, Arkham, and Boston. 'Twas then Obed got the Old Branch Railroad put through. Some Kingsport fishermen heard about the catch and come up in slopes, but they were all lost. Nobody ever saw them again. And just then our folks organized the esoteric order of Dagon, and bought Masonic Hall, often Calvary Commandery for it. Ha ha ha. Matt Elliott was a Mason, and again the Selim, but he dropped about a sight just then. Remember, I'm not saying Obed was set on having things just like they were on Kanaki Isle. I don't think he aimed at fuss to do no mixing, nor raise no young'uns, to take to the water, and turn into fishes, with eternal life. He wanted those gold things, and was willing to pay heavy, and I guess the others were satisfied for a while. Coming to 42, the town did some looking and thinking for itself. Too many folks missing, too much wild preaching at the meeting of a Sunday, too much talk about that reef. I guess I did a bit of telling Selectman Mowry what I saw from the cupola. They were a party one night, as followed Obed's crowd about to the reef, and I heard shots betwixt the dories. Next day Obed and 32 others was in a gaol, with everybody a-wondering just what was afoot and just what charge against him could be got to hold. God, if anybody looked ahead a couple of weeks later when nothing had been thrown into the sea for that long. Zadok was showing signs of fright and exhaustion, and I let him keep silence for a while, though, glancing apprehensively at my watch, the tide had turned and was coming in now, and the sound of the waves seemed to arouse him. I was glad of that tide. For a high water, the fishy smell might not be so bad. Again I strained to catch his whispers. That awful night, I saw them. It was up in the cupola, hordes of them, swarms of them, all over the reef, and swimming up the harbor into the Monnoxet. God, what happened in the streets of Innsmouth that night? They rattled at our door, but Pa wouldn't help. They inclined about the kitchen window with his musket to find Selectman Mowry and see what he could do. Mounds of the dead and the dying, shots and screams, shouting in Old Square and Town Square and New Church Green, got all thrown open. Proclamation, treason, called it the plague, when folks come in and found half our people missing. Nobody left but them as could join in with Obed and those things, or else keep quiet. Never heard of my Pa any more. The old man was panting and perspiring profusely. His grip on my shoulder tightened. Everything cleaned up in the morning. But there were traces. Obed, he can take charge and say things that's going to be changed. Others will worship with us at the meeting time. At certain houses, he's got to entertain guests. They wanted to mix like they've done with the Kanakis, and he, for one, didn't feel bound to stop them. Far gone was Obed, just like a crazy man, on the subject. He says they brung us fish and treasure and should have had what they hankered after. Now, whether it's actually required or not, sometimes people, when they make their spiritual pacts with various entities, they're like, or perform their operations, they're like, oh, I only have to do it once. And then they are suggested again and again what they actually have to do, but they're convinced. And maybe they're convinced they have to do something criminal or perverse this time in a physical sense. Nothing was to be different on the outside. Only we were to keep shy of strangers, if we knowed what was good for us. We all had to take the oath of Dagon, and later on, there was second and third oaths that some took on us. They as could help could get special rewards, gold and such. No use balking, for there were millions of them down there. They'd rather not start rising and wiping out humankind. but that they were to give away and forced to, they could do a lot toward just that. We didn't have them. We didn't have those old charms. Cut off them folk. We don't have those old charms to cut them off like folks in the South Sea did. And those Kanakis wouldn't ever give away their secrets, yield up enough sacrifices and savage knickknacks and harborage in the town when they wanted it, and they'd let well enough alone. Wouldn't bother any strangers as might bear tales outside, that is, without they got prying. All in the band of the faithful order of Dagon, and the children should never die, but go back to the mother Hydra and father Dagon, what we might all come from onset. Ea, Cthulhu, Fatagan, Pa Naglui, Maglu, Napa Cthulhu, Ra, Ya, Waga, Nagal, Fataga. Old Zadok was fast lapsing into stark raving, and I held my breath, poor old soul, to what pitiful depths of hallucination had liquor, plus his hatred of the decay, alienage, and disease around him, brought that fertile, imaginative brain. He began to moan now, and tears were coursing down his channeled cheeks into the depths of his beard. What I had seen since I was 15 years old, Mene, Tekel, a parson. The folk were missing. Did I mention it's a thing that's like was etched on the wall by some weird hand? Which could mean something different in different languages, couldn't it? The folks were missing. And them as killed themselves, they told things in Arkham or Ipswich or such places was all called crazy, like you're calling me right now. But what I had seen, they'd killed me a long time ago for what I know. Only I took the first and second oaths of Dagon, often Obed. So was protected, unless a jury of them proved I'd told things, knowing and deliberate. But I wouldn't take the third oath. I'd have died rather than take that. People should keep their treaties or agreements in the first place, unless it's, wrong, rather than trying to change and get the upper hand, like if a landlord, somebody's renting, and then they're like, oh, I'm going to keep raising, cost hasn't gone up, I'm going to keep raising the rent, or I'm going to reduce what you're renting, or that sort of thing. Just to increase their power, and the same thing happens with countries. It's like, oh, they make an agreement, and then they kind of, was around Civil War time when children born since 46 begun to grow up. Some of them, that is. I was afraid, never did no praying after that awful night, and never seen one of them closest to in all my life that is never so full-blooded of a one. I went to the war, and if I had any guts or sense, I would have never came back, but settled away from here. But folks wrote me things that weren't so bad. That I suppose was because government draftmen were in town after 63. After the war, it was just as bad again. People begun to fall off. Mills and shops shut down. Shipping stopped, and the harbor choked up. The railroad gave in, but they never stopped swimming, and in and about the river from that cursed reef of Satan, and more attic winders got boarded up, and more noises were heard in houses as weren't supposed to have anybody in 'em. Folks outside had their stories about us. Suppose you've heard plenty of them. Seeing what questions you ask. Stories about things they've seen now and then, and about that queer jewelry as still comes in from somewhere that ain't quite got all melted up, but nothing ever gets definite. Nobody will believe anything. They call them gold-like things, pirate loot, and allow the Innsmouth folk he's foreign blood or is distempered or something besides them that lives here and shoot off as many strangers as they can, and encourage the rest not to get very curious, especially around nighttime. Beasts balk at the critters. Horses wasn't mules, but when they got autos, that was all right. In 46, Captain Obed took a second wife that nobody in the town ever saw. Some says he didn't want to, but was made to buy them as he called in. Had 3 children by her. 2 as disappeared young, but 1 gal looked like anybody else and was educated in Europe. Obed finally got her married off by a trick to an Arkham feller, as didn't suspect anything. But nobody outside will have anything to do with Innsmouth folk now. Barnabas Marsh, that runs the refinery, now is Obed's grandson by his first wife, son of Onesiphorus, his eldest son. But his mother was another of those as wasn't ever seen outdoors. Right now, Barnabas is about changed. Can't shut his eyes anymore, and is all about of shape. They say he still wears clothes, but he'll take to the water soon. Maybe he's tried it already. They do sometimes go down for little spells before they go down for good. Hasn't been seen about in public for night on 10 years. Don't know how his poor wife can feel. She came up from Ipswich, and they nigh lynched Barnabas when he courted her 50-odd years ago. Obed, he died in 78, and all the next generation is gone now. The first wife's children dead, and the rest, God knows. The second of the incoming tide was now very insistent, and little by little it seemed to change the old man's mood from maudlin tearfulness to watchful fear. He would pause now and then to renew those nervous glances over his shoulder or out towards the reef. And despite the wild absurdity of his tale, I could not help beginning to share his vague apprehensiveness. Zadok now grew shriller and seemed to be trying to whip up his courage with louder speech. Hey, you, why don't you say something? How do you like to be living in a town like this, with everything a-rotting and dying, and boarded up monsters crawling and bleeding and barking and hopping around black cellars and attics every way you turn? Hey, how do you like to hear howling night after night from the churches and Order of Dagon Hall, and know what's doing part of the howling? How do you like to hear what comes from the awful reef every May Eve and Hallowmass? Hey, think the old man's crazy, eh? Well, sir, let me tell you, that ain't the worst. And remember, May Eve is based on the later in the year Beltane night, and Halloween is based on the later in the year Samhain night. Zadok was really screaming now, and the mad frenzy of his voice disturbed me more than I cared to own. Curse ye. Don't see that a staring at me with those eyes? I tell Obed Marsh he's in hell, and he's got to stay there. Heh heh, in hell, I say. Can't get me. I haven't done nothing, or told anybody nothing. Oh, you young feller. Well, even if I hadn't told nobody nothing yet. I'm going to now. Just you set still and listen to me, boy. This is what I haven't told anybody. I say, I didn't get to do any prying. I didn't get to do any praying after that night, but I found things about just the same. Well, as much as time as he spends drinking, obviously he has time to pray, but people have their choice, don't they? You want to know what the real horror is, hey? Well, it is this. It isn't what those fish devils he's done, but what they're going to do. They're bringing things up about where they come from into the town. Been doing it for years, and slackening up lately. Those houses north of the river betwixt Water and Main Streets is full of them. Those devils and what they brung up, and what they got ready. I say, when they get ready. Ever hear tell of a Shoggoth? Hey, did you hear me? I tell you, I know what those things are. I've seen them one night when yeah. The hideous suddenness and inhuman frightfulness of the man's shriek made me faint, his eyes looking past me toward the malodorous sea were positively starting from his head, while his face was a mask of fear worthy of Greek tragedy. His bony claw dug monstrously into my shoulder, and he made no motion as I turned my head to look at whatever he had glimpsed. There was nothing that I could see, only the incoming tide, with perhaps one set of ripples, more local than long-flung line of breakers. But now Zadok was shaking me, and I turned back to watch the melting of that fear-frozen face into a chaos of twitching eyelids and mumbling gums. Presently his voice came back, albeit as a trembling whisper. Get out of here, get out of here. They saw us. Get out for your life. Don't wait for anything. They know now. Run for it. Quick. Out of this town. Another heavy wave dashed against the loosening masonry of the bygone wharf and changed the mad ancient's whisper into another inhuman and blood-curdling scream. Yeah. Before I could recover my scattered wits, he'd relaxed his clutch on my shoulder and dashed wildly inland toward the street, reeling northward, around the ruined warehouse wall. I glanced back at the sea, but there was nothing there, and when I reached Water Street and looked along it toward the north, there was no remaining trace of Zadok Allen. And, we're in program 6 here, but this is the official start of part 4. I can hardly describe the mood which I left by this harrowing episode, an episode at once mad and pitiful, grotesque and terrifying. The grocery boy had prepared me for it, yet the reality left me none the less bewildered and disturbed. Puerile though the story was, old Zadok's insane earnestness and horror had communicated to me a mounting unrest, which joined with my earlier sense of loathing for the town and its blight of intangible shadow. Later, I might sift the tale and extract some nucleus of historic allegory. Just now, I wished to put it out of my head. The hour had grown perilously late. My watch said 7:15. An Arkham bus left Town Square at 8, so I tried to give my thoughts as neutral and practical a cast as possible. Meanwhile, walking rapidly through the deserted streets of gaping roofs and leaning houses toward the hotel where I'd checked my valise and would find my bus. Though the golden light of late afternoon gave the ancient roofs and decrepit chimneys an air of mystic loveliness and peace, I could not help glancing over my shoulder now and then. I would surely be very glad to get out of malodorous and fear-shadowed Innsmouth, and wish there were some other vehicle than the bus driven by that sinister-looking fellow sergeant. Yet I did not hurry too precipitously, for there were architectural details worth viewing at every silent corner that I could easily, I calculated, cover the necessary distance in a half hour. Studying the grocery youth's map and seeking a route I had not traversed before, I chose Marsh Street instead of State for my approach to the town square. Near the corner of Fall Street, I began to see scattered groups of furtive whisperers. When I finally reached the square, I saw that almost all the loiterers were congregated around the door of the Gilman house. It seemed as if many bulging, watery, unwinking eyes looked oddly at me as I claimed my valise in the lobby, and I hoped that none of these unpleasant creatures would be my fellow passengers on the coach. The bus, rather early, rattled in with 3 passengers, somewhat before 8, and an evil-looking fellow on the sidewalk muttered a few indistinguishable words to the driver. Sergeant threw out a mailbag and roll of newspapers and entered the hotel, while the passengers, the same men who I had seen arriving in Newburyport that morning, shambled to the sidewalk and exchanged some faint guttural words with a loafer in a language I could have sworn was not English, and I boarded the empty coach and took the same seat I had before, but was hardly settled before Sergeant reappeared and began mumbling in a throaty voice, a peculiar repulsiveness